Goedenavond, het is weer woensdagavond en dat betekent tijd voor Meet the Pro. En deze week hebben wij een internationale fotograaf en filmmaker vanuit de UK. Niemand minder dan Clive Booth. Nou, we gaan overschakelen naar het Engels, want dat is de taal die wij samen gaan spreken deze uitzending. So I say to you, Clive, a very warm welcome to the Netherlands.
Good morning, Michael. How's that? Was that all right?
That was all right. And you gave away a little secret about our show. You said good morning, and it is evening when we're airing this. So
do you want to do that
great.
again?
No, absolutely no. I think it's great. We can be honest about this, right? We're recording this in the morning. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, very good. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. You know, good to be here, and it's always nice to be able to share, you know, your work, your experiences.
Absolutely. We are very happy to have you. For the people for the viewers who don't know you yet, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a Canon ambassador, and I'm a photographer and a filmmaker. I'm also a graphic designer. I began my career as a graphic designer, and more recently I've been working with Canon on teaching, and I write a little bit, and like we're doing today, I give seminars and workshops. So I guess you might say my career is multifaceted. Wow,
yeah, you're doing a lot of things, Clive. And my interest is this period of time it's a special time for everybody worldwide. Your hair is looking great. Looks like you just let it flow.
Well, it was your influence. You know, it was your influence. Yeah, because you know, we met yesterday, and I saw your hair, and I thought, I don't want to be upstaged. So I thought I better make an effort today. This is a 3-month without a haircut, as you can see.
Yes.
But you know, I'm like yourself probably. You know, I'm quite enjoying this. You know, this freedom.
3 months here also, and looking great, man. I have to say it. How is this particular time for you and with your work?
Well, I mean, there's no denying it that the work kind of stopped almost immediately on lockdown, and it was a time to sort of, I guess, contemplate where I was, how I would adapt to that situation, and also to a degree, I guess you might say, reinvent myself. So there was a time where it was kind of a bit like a stasis. It was just this full stop, because I travel a lot for Canon. In the last 2 years, I've done over 30 separate speaking and workshop engagements for them all over Europe, Middle East and Africa, and so that all ended, and all my shoots ended. So what do you do? You know, so I started to have a big think about that. The very first thing I did was look to be able to continue to do the live broadcasts. So that was all new for me. So I've been working on that, which you and I have discussed. And then Canon approached me to create a film from home as part of their Canon Connector series, and I took that very seriously and decided to make a mini documentary about myself, actually, and about being at home, about mindfulness, about my work, sharing my experiences, and that took quite a few weeks, actually.
Well, I see the movie, we all seen it here, and we love it. We're actually going to talk about that little movie a little bit later, so let's save that for now. What I wanted to ask you, you started out as a graphic designer and then transformed into a photographer and a filmmaker. How did that happen?
Well, I've always shot pictures ever since I was the age of 9, and in fact many years ago I used to shoot kind of adventure. I was an adventure filmmaker, photographer, so I used to work for BBC television from time to time. I've worked in the Arctic, I've worked on sea stacks in Scotland, and also I worked for BBC TV on the Eiger in Switzerland, on several sides of the Eiger. So it was a big passion back then, but I trained as a graphic designer, and that was my passion also. Yeah. And I followed that passion, and was a graphic designer, still am in fact, for many years. But an opportunity came up, I think it was in 2003, to photograph a charity event in Scotland, a little island that I go to called Islay, in the Hebrides. And this was a project to collect whiskey. There are 9 distilleries around the island, and it was a project to collect whiskey, and then we were going to create what's called a vatted malt. For those whiskey fans out there, you'll know what that is, and for those whiskey fans also, you'll know the types of whiskey we're talking about on Islay. And so we did that. We rowed a clinker-built skiff boat around the island, picking up the whiskey, and I photographed that and also designed the label. In fact, it was a very interesting opportunity, because at that time I was very much a graphic designer, and a friend of mine who I commissioned as a photographer regularly couldn't make it. He broke his ankle, so I ended up shooting it instead of him, and it was that which was the trigger and the turning point. It was that made me think, actually, I really love photography. I want to explore this as a potential profession. And of course, being a graphic designer, and at that time I had some good clients, British Airways, Toyota, Adidas, and Boots in the UK, and Waitrose in the UK. So I could commission myself, and that's what I did, and it just sort of grew from there.
Yeah, and I think that the craft as a graphic designer combined with photography and videography, it's almost like the perfect combination. You have all the assets to give something to your clients, right?
I agree. In fact, when young people ask me now, what's a good background to become a filmmaker or a photographer, yeah, I often say, well, have you thought about graphic design, or certainly some form of mixed media? Because I think it's a very good grounding. And I think what it helps you do is, I mean, I spent many years working as a designer for print and layout and art directing other photographers. So now when I go into a shoot situation, I can very quickly assess the location, look at the composition, as the photographer side of me looks at the light and the technical, but very much I'm my own creative director, and that's what graphic design, that's what it brings to the skill base, I think, for photographers and filmmakers.
So, and the graphic design absolutely is some of your crafts. You're also a photographer and a videographer. Which of the both you feel more alike? Like, you feel more a photographer or more a filmmaker?
That's a difficult question, actually. I think I feel all of them equally. For many years, I didn't feel confident enough to call myself a filmmaker. I think I was very fortunate to have in my hands the very first 5D Mark II in Europe, I think, one of the very first. And I made one of the very first films with the 5D Mark II in Europe. At that time, I'd actually just been given an amazing break by fashion photographer Nick Knight. I was working as a designer for Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, and I was invited to parties by LVMH for Moet and Chandon, and I took my 5D along with an 85 prime, shot some pictures with that at this party. Fashion photographer Nick Knight saw those pictures and then immediately commissioned me to shoot London Fashion Week and also become his set photographer. And it was there where I started to experiment with Canon technology. My original 5D 85 prime and my go-to lenses, in fact, still are in many ways, although the cameras have changed, the lenses have remained relatively similar. And so when 5D2 came along, that it was an immediate thing for me. I went and filmed a fashion show at the Raphael Gallery in London for Roxandra Lincic, and I was working with an editor in New York at the time, Austin, and he and I cut this 30-second, I think it was, 1 minute short, and that changed everything. All my clients that I was working with at that time, like people like MAC Cosmetics, for example, just immediately sent me to Milan and New York and said, please, shoot commercials for us. And then that led to shooting several perfume commercials. And at the time, they were all shot on DSLRs.
You were in, right?
Sorry?
You were in.
In? I was in.
Yeah, like you got that chance, and you got a lot out of it, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we can walk through life almost passing opportunity by. This is another thing I talk to young people about, is that not everybody sees the opportunity. You've got to be ready. The radar's got to be on, and that's very much what happened with 5D Mark II. I saw what Vincent Laforet had done in the US, and also I think there was another short film that was shot in Skywalker Ranch, and everybody was amazed by this camera. And I thought, well, it's no good just having the camera and just shooting anything with it. So I approached Roxandra Lincic, who I was working with at the time, and she said, sure, come along. And so I shot her show. I mean, you can see it on my website. And that was really the turning point. And it was creating opportunities, because all through my career, I'm creating opportunities. I mean, there was no fee involved in that. There was no money involved in that. Canon gave me the camera.
Yeah, that's something that we have to talk about later in the show, because that's a big part of your philosophy, I think, when I got to know you preparing the show. And I also want to talk about your distinctive style, which is a little bit inspired by the old painters, like, for example, Rembrandt. But maybe we can do that in our next segment, which is all about your last project, which has a beautiful story, your beautiful movie called Home. So we're going to the last project of Clive Booth. Ja, de laatste foto-video, eigenlijk is het video van Clive Booth, is zijn film die hij gemaakt heeft, genaamd Home. Die gaat over zijn tijd in deze coronaperiode. Een heel toepasselijke video dus. We gaan er naar kijken en onder andere met de Clive daarover praten. Clive, your project, your movie called Home. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the short film, originally it was just going to be 3 minutes. Canon approached me to shoot a film about myself, offering potential advice to our market, and they'd given me the brief, anything from 3 to 10 minutes max, and I started to think about this as an opportunity. And because we're all in lockdown, I thought, and the idea was at the time, we didn't know when we were going to come out of lockdown, so everything had slowed right down. So I wanted to take this mindful approach to filmmaking and create something that's really calm and quiet and reflective. And so that's what I did. And I approached the film. First of all, what I should say is that in my normal career as a filmmaker, I work with some incredibly talented people. I have a very, very talented cinematographer in Chris Clark, who's worked on Bond films, Harry Potter, Bourne Identity. I have an amazing editor called Tristram Edwards. I have a fantastic producer in Mark George. I have great people on sound, assistants, digitechs, etc., colorists. So if you'd have asked me before lockdown, Clive, we want you to make a film, I would have said no. But because of lockdown, there was no choice. So it was, well, you either do it or you don't. So I thought, no, I'm going to do it. And bear in mind, at that point, I've never really edited it in Adobe Premiere, only with my editor. And I've done very little with sound, but sound design is really important to filmmaking. But I've worked with some great sound guys. I have a great dubbing mixer, for example. So these are all big challenges for me. And what lockdown taught me was that I couldn't go out to anybody else. I had to do it all myself. And it forced me to do that. And so all the time I'm thinking as an editor, I wanted to talk a little bit about mindfulness. So I wanted to do a little bit about where I live and set kind of an establishing shot or series of shots or scenes, and then go into talking about my work. And I love print because of my background as a graphic designer. So I thought, what a better way to talk about my work than to actually show the print. So I put a rig above my print table, and of course your hands, as you can see right now, are very expressive. So I thought, well, if I'm holding prints, I can actually express a little bit about my emotion, my feeling about what I did to take that picture using my hands. And so that's what I did. And it was, I have to say, it was an amazing journey.
Well, you became a little bit like an independent filmmaker all at once, right? There were a lot of... Yes, and well, great that you got that challenge and that you took it. There were a couple of things that I took away from your movie, which, at first, your voice is really relaxing. I was watching the movie and I got all relaxed just by the way of your editing and your combination with your voice telling the story, which also is my second note that I want to make, is you made a 20-minute movie, around 20 minutes, talking and just having pictures in your hand, talking about them, and made it fairly interesting, which I think is a big accomplishment. And then the third thing that I want to note is that because you did this, I got to know your way of photography and your distinctive style really, really deeply. I understand it and I really appreciate it because you explained everything in this movie, which I think is great for everybody to watch. I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I didn't want it to be overly technical. I never do. My feeling about the technical in photography, dare I say it, I feel that's the easy bit. I think we can all learn the technical. I mean, I remember when I was at college. I mean, we did study photography. It was a big part of our course, and my photography tutor used to say to me, "Just learn the technical until you know it inside out, and then forget about it." You know, but that's why people say, you know, shoot every day, keep shooting, keep practicing, and so I wanted it to be more about the emotion, more about the connection. It was also, I should say, that the theme was about portraiture and it was about natural light. And the reason I chose those themes was it was possible to look at those pictures and be able to recreate those pictures from home for the majority of those pictures. But I wanted to particularly talk about the importance of the connection that you make with the subject, the interpersonal skills that we need as photographers and filmmakers, and that was a kind of a key objective for me within the film.
Well, you absolutely nailed it on that. The thing also is that your style I referred a little bit to the old painters like Rembrandt. You work with continuous light, which give you the opportunity as a photographer to also use your lighting to make videos at the same time, right? How did you get to do this style?
That's right. I've always been a lover of continuous light because I like to be able to see what I'm shooting. And it does mean, and I think this really goes back to my early work making films back in, I think, 2008, when I first started being commissioned because of 5D Mark II, and being able to simultaneously shoot moving image and stills meant using continuous light. So I was a very early adopter of, say, light panels, for example. and bicolor light panels. I mean, that's what I'm lit with now. In fact, the bicolor light panel now I bought over a decade ago. In those days, they were very, very expensive. Now, I'll show you a little bit later the kind of LEDs I work with now, which are very cool. But yeah, you're also absolutely right about my influences, and that was a big part of the film too. I wanted to discuss the influences that I've had in my life and mentors. So people like Sir Don McCullum, for example, has been one of my greatest influences. And Don is as is many photographers. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've worked very closely with Don McCullum and still do. Fashion photographer Nick Knight, fashion photographer Miles Aldrich. All of these people are obsessed with light. You can't say it any other way. I mean, putting aside composition and subject, it's then all about light, and light gives you atmosphere. And so I wanted to bring all of that in, and I wanted to also show where that influence came from. And it came from a trip to my local museum when I was age 9, and I saw the paintings of Joseph Wright, the 18th century painter. And that then led to me seeing the work of Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Caravaggio, and Leonardo da Vinci. So this three-dimensional lighting, which I absolutely love and adore, and so I wanted to explain a little bit about that in the film too.
Well, thank you very much for this beautiful film. I highly recommend everybody to watch it. De link staat in de omschrijving en jullie hebben al heel veel kunnen zien tijdens ons gesprek nu zo net. Clive, there are a lot of people who asked questions to you. So I wanted to continue to questions and answers round 1.
Okay.
Let's do it. We gaan naar de vragenronde 1. Vragenronde 1. Clive, we have the first question from Tamara Dangerman. I think you could read this like Danger Man, but it's not Danger Man, it's Dangerman. And she asks, what is the best advice you ever got?
Well, I've been lucky. I've had lots and lots of advice. But there was one piece of advice that really stuck in my mind. And it wasn't, when people ask me about advice, you know, I often talk about preparation being very important, because as you and I have done, we've prepared for this today. So preparation, collaboration, they're all really important. But I was making a short film with fashion designer Henry Holland back in 2013, I think. It's on the website. It's a moving portrait. And I was working in collaboration with fashion photographer Nick Knight in Show Studio. And I was so focused on all of these clever technical things that we were doing. There was one scene, for example, where I'd hired a platform where you put a car on it for a car showroom. We covered it in black velvet, and then we put Henry on this in an embryonic position, and he rotated in the movie. This was Canon's first 4K movie, actually, on the original C500. You can see it on my website that there are two, in fact. And so there was a lot of technical stuff. And Nick Knight is famous for not giving any advice, really. Nick is one of those people who spots talent and then lets you just run with it. But I remember this one meeting we finished, and there was all this technical stuff going on. And I said, have you got any thoughts, Nick? He said, well, just the one thing, really. He said, just remember the performance. And it really stuck with me, because I was so intent and focused on all of this sort of stuff that I was doing, that it would be very easy as a director and a filmmaker to forget about the connection that you need to make with the subject. So, and that piece of advice stuck with me, and so much so, in fact, that the same piece of advice you can carry into, say, portrait photography, where you can be thinking about the composition, you can be thinking about how it's lit, you can be thinking if you've got a narrative-driven portrait where you've got props, you're looking at all of these things and you're thinking, wow, it looks great, it looks beautiful, but you're forgetting this. You know, this connection between you and the subject. And often you can do all of that cool stuff, but there's something might be missing from it, and you're thinking, well, what is that? and it could just be that you've not made that connection. And I learned from that. And a good example for me is when I bumped into the British film movie icon Terence Stamp in a tea shop in London, and managed to convince him to come back to the tea shop the next day for a portrait shoot. He was working with Tim Burton at the time. And he got a couple of days off. He agreed to do it. There's a whole story again about this on my site. And when we sat down in the tea shop, I was going to shoot some pictures. I'd worked out where the light direction was and stuff, and we talked for 40 minutes before I even brought the camera up to actually take that picture. So if you have the time, you don't always have the time, but if you have the time, take that time to get to know the subject. Like on the set of Downton Abbey, which you'll see in my film, I had very little time with the actors on that set. And the way I got around that one was I asked them to go into character, because they were already in their costumes on the set. So I said, can you go into character for me? I remember Jessica Brown Finley particularly went into character, and I said, what was your last scene? And she'd sat with a dying soldier. And I said, can you relive that last scene? So I'm becoming a director. I've thought about the light. I've worked it out. It was very quick, although myself and my assistant Billy had thought very carefully about it. And then I was just focusing on the direction between myself and Jessica. And within seconds, Jessica started to cry. And if I hadn't have thought about the direction and actually thought, right, how am I going to get the best from Jessica? How is this going to work? And I just thought about all the technical, I wouldn't have got the pictures that I got. And I can give you endless examples of this. Karen Gillan in Cannes, for example. You know, we're running through the streets of Cannes. And it was great because we were all staying in a villa together, the production company. So we all got to know each other, and that very much became a team process. So Karen, very passionate actor, director, model, just immediately got into this whole adventure, and then started jumping on merry-go-rounds and getting on swings, and so I just follow her and shoot these pictures. So I can give you endless examples of that, but
it's great advice. It's great advice, and also you already named it. Maybe this is a little example too. Like, we also talked for a couple of hours in preparation of this show, just to get to know each other and make that connection too. It's like even for this little show, it's really important. It's
really important. That's what I was very impressed about you, actually, that you do that. And I mean, I've had films, and I think you might mention one of them, where I've been the other side of the camera. And there's one in particular I'm very, very proud of my work with the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. And that director, Mark Rodway, he came and spent a day with me right here in my office. And then he and I went to Scotland, and we went on the lifeboat in Scotland, which is a long journey. I mean, it's 12 hours just there to get there. And so he immersed himself, if you'll excuse the pun, into that program, into that project. And because of that, he was able to make this extraordinarily beautiful film. I cannot stress how important that is, and what a great bit of advice that Nick gave me. Absolutely.
And you are just giving your advice also, not only here, but also in a special program for Canon, the Canon Young, Young People program. You're doing a lot for that, right? Teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working with the Canon Young People program now for just over a year. In fact, we should be, if it wasn't for lockdown, I'd be teaching right now. This is an amazing program. We've now have a connection with the UN. We have somebody within who works in the UN and is associated with Canon. We use you can look these up, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and we use that as a brief for the young people. And we're teaching young people from the ages of 10 right up to late teens. And actually, some of that work has actually gone beyond that, because I've also worked with PhD neuroscientists, for example, using the same structure that we created for 10-year-old pupils. So it's about storytelling, and it's about using photography and filmmaking, but most of all, putting that together with words to tell the stories and to actually create Instagram stories, TikTok stories, Twitter posts, Facebook posts, but of course we have very little time to get people's attention, so that's been a real challenge and something I've loved. And in fact, my skills, I guess, what's been good about that, it utilizes every single skill that I have, from graphic design to filmmaking to photography. And of course, as human beings, the reason we talk about storytelling is that the brain, it kind of decodes information better as a narrative rather than bits of information. So this is why storytelling is so important. And of course, now with social media, we have very little time. I think on Instagram we have something like 1.7 seconds to grab somebody's attention.
Oh, crazy, right? Well, as an ex-primary school teacher for 11 years, I'm really happy to hear that you're doing this. This is great stuff, especially for children that age. We're going to the second question, coming from Tom Spaans, and he asks you, how do you get your assignments, like the one for the Royal Birmingham Ballet and Isle of Islay? Do I say that correctly? Islay?
It's actually Isla.
Isla, I'm sorry.
If you think of it, I-S-L-A, Isla, or I-L-A, Isla.
Yes.
Good, really good question, this, and it's hopefully an informative answer. Both of those projects came as a result of personal project work. So I decided I wanted to create a project on Isla, for example, because I've been going there for 25 years. I know the people there very well. It's like a second home. So I have this unique connection with the people in the place. And so what do you do in a personal project? You look to explore something that you feel passionately about. It comes from your heart. And it's something that you hope other people maybe haven't got quite that good a connection with, and so you use that. And that's what I did. And the Isla project, it began very much as I wanted to show the day-to-day lives of these island people, and I wanted to show landscape, seascape, flora, fauna, and so I started to build a gallery of work. I then put together a treatment, a written proposal to Canon. This was actually Canon Europe Print, who I have a long relationship with. They immediately said yes, and Canon at the time just brought out the 5D and the 5DS. So we had a big high-res camera, and that, of course, that worked very well for print. And so that then became a commission, and then my agent, Mark George, completely out of the blue, this was probably about 18 months later, completely out of the blue, I had a phone call from Louis Vuitton Moët Hennessy in Paris saying, we've seen Clive's work on Isla and we love it. And we have a brand called Ardbeg Whiskey. Now, I know Ardbeg Whiskey very well. It's part of Glenmorangie whiskey. Ardbeg is arguably one of the finest whiskies in the world. It's certainly right up there, and huge fan base. Very cool brand to be associated with. And my work on Isla, incidentally, wasn't all sunny days. It was very gritty. I mean, if you look at it, on my website, you'll see it's very gritty, it's overcast, it's bags of atmosphere, because I shot everything on primes with very shallow focus, with really cool lighting, and that's what Ardbeg saw, or LVMH saw, and that then led to a three-year commission shooting their social media campaigns, but actually shooting them on big cameras.
Yeah, so you really get great assignments also from your own personal passion projects that starts out like that, and then it becomes a real assignment and probably even a paid job. That's really also a great advice for people who maybe wants to get professional. Just keep doing your passion things, your projects, keep lighting that fire, because that can lead to real jobs. People notice your passion, your beautiful work that you're making, and maybe giving your assignments. Absolutely.
And the second one, Birmingham Royal Ballet, I was, as I regularly do, I was at the UK photo show, and I was giving a talk actually about the film I'd made in Calcutta with Sir Don McCullin. Yes. And people come up at the end and we have a chat and we share ideas, and this one guy came up to me, and there was something about him that was very we immediately it's kind of hard to, there was a presence, he had a presence, and I think a lot of it was his posture. His posture was so perfect, and we were talking about photography, and he was a very keen photographer, and then I said, but what do you do? And he said, well, I'm a dancer. And he was very modest, and I said, well, but you know, where? And he said, oh, I'm a principal at the Birmingham Royal Ballet. And then it all clicked into place, and I thought, oh, wow. And so that conversation could have ended then, you know, and we could have gone our separate ways. And I said, and immediately, this is when I say about the radar being on and thinking, this is interesting, because you're interested in photography, I'm interested in ballet, and I love working with dancers. So I said, look, let's stay in touch. And so we did. And then his name's Tyrone Singleton, he's principal at Birmingham Royal Ballet, and he invited myself and my wife to the Birmingham Royal Ballet, and we had this amazing backstage tour. I then saw the story of the ballet shoe, and then I went off and wrote a film treatment to actually make a film about the story of the ballet shoe, which is hooked around a ballerina who'd had an injury, and so it was a very interesting story. Sadly, that film didn't get made. It was within two days of being shot, and it got cancelled, unfortunately, and that can happen. But I didn't let it stop me there. So Tyrone and I started to collaborate and work together, and that then led to another commission by the Birmingham Royal Ballet to create a single image or several images around a new project for them, which was called Ballet Now, and it had the title of Ignite. And it was combining ballet with fire. And then that became a huge project, because as in a lot of my career, there was this synchronicity, and Canon were about to launch their first new system, complete camera system in 30 years, the EOS R system. And so that shoot became a key shoot for the product launch for EOS R.
Really great stuff. The third and last question for this round is, what is your motivation for photography? Gregory Kieboom asks you that.
I think motivation is a good question. I think that's got to come from the heart. I have to be honest, I'm not one of those photographers who shoots every day. I think I should. But I don't. And for me, I like, if I get to go places like Scotland or say Switzerland, where I go to every year, I love to take my camera. I like to be able to go to places or be in situations where I can shoot something or create something or tell a story that I can then share with others. And I think that's a big motivation, is this idea of giving you the purpose and setting yourself the challenge to record something that you can then pass on to others. Very much the same with the Canon Young People program, and actually the charity that I work with, the Ideas Foundation in London, where when I'm shooting project work now, I very much think about the young people and how this work could impact upon them and what they might learn from that. So that's a big motivation, actually creating, of course we're all content creators now, creating content that you hope that you're going to learn from yourself, but you also hope that other people are going to learn from that as well. And I'm not talking necessarily about the technical here. This is about coming from the heart. So yeah, that's a big motivation. Having a project that you feel sort of excited about as well is really important. You know, you need to feel the passion. You need to feel the passion for whatever it is that you're doing. That's key.
100% agree. Let's see if we, or in this case you, can give some motivation and inspiration to somebody who sent in his or her picture. Wij gaan naar portfolio ronde 1. Portfolio ronde 1 en de eerste foto die is ingezonden komt van Tamara Dangerman. Dangerman. Tamara, send in this picture, which I think is a beautiful picture. What can you tell about this, Clive?
Yeah, I mean, I like the. I mean, if we talked earlier on about the three-dimensional lighting. I mean, that's very present in here. I don't know what the story is behind this. I'd like to know, because maybe she's trying to tell a story in this because of the lights around the image itself. So one thing I would say, I love narrative portraiture. So I love putting props in my images. I mean, there's one that you may be able to share where I photographed an Apollo astronaut who'd actually orbited the moon 75 times. I actually managed to get a moon globe off Amazon and got him to hold that globe. So maybe there is something within this where Tamara is actually using these lights to tell a story. So, and I guess my point is there, if you are going to use props, it can either be completely just about aesthetics, or it can have meaning. I mean, the thing is, you know, in photography we have rules of thirds. There are so many rules, but you know, rules are there also to be broken. I like the way that Tamara's lit this particularly. There's a lot of sensitivity in this. Of course, she's taken this unusual angle. She's put the camera above her. She's laid on the ground. She's making a connection with the camera that I quite like. And it'd be interesting to know if these lights, you know, that there is a meaning to those lights.
I get it.
But I mean, generally, I think it's a really interesting self-portrait, and I think one of the hardest things for any portrait photographer, actually, and me included, is to take a good self-portrait.
That's a challenge, absolutely. And then to properly light yourself.
Yeah, well, I did it when I was making my film at home, and I wasn't intending to, but I thought, oh, that might make a good self-portrait. So I managed it. In fact, I've just set a really interesting challenge to an astronaut explorer, Richard Garriott, who's going to dive to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and he's taken an EOS R, and he can only use I think it's a 15 or 1635 lens, because it's a tiny hull and cabin, and I've set him the challenge of actually shooting the world's deepest self-portrait.
Wow, that's a first.
At nearly 11,000 meters. I said, look, it's not a selfie. I want this to be a self-portrait, you know, really considered.
With lighting and everything, right?
Well, yeah, but you know, going back to what we'd said previously about the connection you make between the camera, that same connection equally goes for self-portraiture. So I said to Richard, when you're at the bottom of the Mariana Trench and you're thinking about, you've got the light here and you've got the camera here, I want you to think about the connection you make with the camera. You know, there you are in the deepest part of any ocean in the world, and you're only one of just over a dozen people who've done that. I want you to think about that, because I think it makes a difference. And I think what Tamara's done here, she's made it's kind of a very sensitive connection with the camera, which I really like.
Yeah. Well, for starters, I think in the Mariana Trench it will be dark enough to properly light yourself. That's for the first. And the second is, I think this is a great picture, but I totally understand the difference. Like if we're looking at your picture with the astronaut and the moon globe, the light has a purpose in the photograph, and I think that is your advice to her. Like, try to tell the story with the prop and make it part of like the story in this case. Yes.
It's kind of what I look for. I mean, it doesn't mean to say that you have to do it, you know, but maybe, you know, if it is possible to use props. I used a prop recently with Mr. Ishizuka, the CEO and president of Canon EMEA, where I got him to hold the actual mount ring, because he's looking through that mount ring to the next 30 years of Canon. So, you know, props become very, very useful things within shoots where you can create a real good narrative, but they're not essential, you know.
No, absolutely, but this is I think a good advice for her to try a new picture and see what she can do with with this little bit of improvement. Clive, we're going to questions and answers round 2. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Vragenronde 2. Vragenronde 2 en we gaan gelijk van start met de eerste vraag van Judith van Zand. En die vraagt, Clive, I saw that you also do a lot of printing. Which printers do you use and do you have any tips on how to make nicer prints and how your colors really stay true? Good question.
It's a good question. This is a question that we could put a whole
separate show.
Yeah,
yes.
We could have a separate show on this one.
Yes.
How do we get this down into a short segment? I'll give it a go. The printers that I use are Canon image prographs. I have a Pro 1000 and a Pro 2000. So one's a full bleed A2 and one's a full bleed A1. One's roll fed, one's sheet fed. Canon produce many wonderful papers, as well as do people like Canson and Hahnemuller. I mean, I particularly like some of the Hahnemuller papers. The papers, both Canon and Hahnemuller, are archival, so they can last for in excess of 150 years because of the clever inks and the papers. So first of all, that's my starting point. You know, I start with great paper. There are some things that you can do to improve your printmaking. Now, the reason I start with paper is because good paper is not cheap. It's quite expensive and you don't want to waste it. So the first piece of advice is that you need to calibrate your monitor. Now that's going to mean an investment. So you'll need to get yourself a spectrophotometer. And that could be around 100, maybe 150 euros. So have a think about that. I'm fortunate that I have an ISO and that has its own built-in spectrophotometer. But what that does is it balances the color and it balances the brightness and the contrast, so you have a base point to work to. Paper manufacturers will give you what's called an ICC profile. Now, if you buy a Canon paper, that's already pre-programmed into the printer. And Canon have got a very sophisticated program called Professional Print and Layout. And so I go from Lightroom or Photoshop into Canon Professional Print and Layout, and that then does all the work for you, and it makes it very easy to make good prints. So a spectrophotometer, X-Rite produce them. Some monitors, if you're really into this, then look at ISO because they have them built in. That's the key point. Something very important, and then making sure that you have the right ICC profiles. I mean, if you really want to make this easy, Canon, just go Canon papers, Canon printers, because everything's done for you. And then the last thing is the viewing light. I mean, as you can see here, I have an LED viewing light. The color temperature of that viewing light is the same color temperature as my monitor. So what you see underneath that viewing light is what you see on the monitor screen. And this is all really important in terms of what we call a color managed workflow. Now that's the short version.
Well, thank you very much, because this is a whole new world even for me. So I think that you broke it down into a couple of good little tips. Especially about the monitor. I think a lot of people forget that sometimes, even we as filmmakers. You're color grading your film on a monitor which can have a slightly tint to the green or a slightly tint to the magenta or whatever, and that can really influence how people are going to look at your final product if you grade it not right. And that is with print in this case is the same. You can have the same problem. You can
actually calibrate any monitor with a spectrophotometer, even an iPhone screen or an iPad. So that's a really important tool in that process. I mean, just very quickly on the filmmaking side, the same goes. You need a calibrated monitor for filmmaking and for grading. The color grading and workflow in film is different to print, but it's nevertheless equally important. And also, when I'm working on like my film at home, I have it playing on 3 separate monitors. So I'm looking at the preview on an iPad,
Yeah.
So I can see it on an iOS device, I'm looking at it on a laptop, and I'm looking at it on a calibrated ISO monitor as well.
Really
so I can see how that's going to look, because a film is never going to be seen on paper. You know, it's always going to be seen. And often when you work with a colorist, you'll have a TV as well. So sometimes I'll go down to my Sony Bravia and I'll look at that too.
Yeah. Great tips. Second question, also on the printing side. I also regularly print my photos, but find it difficult to choose which paper to use. Do you have any tips for this? Peter Terwij. Well, a little bit, you already addressed this a little bit, huh?
Yeah, we have, but there's more I can say. Paper is absolutely critical. And one thing I should say about print, before I talk about paper, is that print is tactile. It's still arguably, from me at least, the best way a photographer can share their work, because I can control everything about that print. Now, if my work is being seen on a monitor, you know, your monitor is going to be different to mine. An iOS device is going to be different to a laptop, different to a calibrated monitor. But on paper, I can lock that down, and I can say that is exactly what I have in my mind, and how I want my picture to be seen. So paper is absolutely, it's the gold really in print. It's absolutely fundamental. And of course, there are lots of different papers. Without talking about the brands which I've already mentioned, you can print on matte, you can print on gloss, you can print on satin. I personally kind of have like a mixture, which is it's kind of like a pearl effect, which I really like. But they're equally good, and you can decide. I mean, for example, sometimes if you were to look at fashion, it might lend itself very well to a high gloss. I mean, I'm being very I'm simplistic about this, but and a landscape, for example, might look great on matte. The reason I choose a pearl is it's kind of somewhere in between. And you've got, you know, Barita papers. You've got, I mean, and the thing that the printers are very clever at now is you don't get things that are called metamerism, which you used to get in digital printing, where you get this bronzing effect in the light. So Canon have got super clever with their printers, super clever, and it's now possible to get everything that you see on the screen onto paper. But paper choice is absolutely critical, and I would urge people to experiment with that.
Yes, absolutely. That last part, and it's a little bit of also a personal preference.
Exactly, it's a subjective view, and also, I mean, you know, we change. I mean, I used to print everything on what's called photo rag. And then I changed to pearl, and then I may change again. And sometimes you'll print on something depending on what it is, the story that you want to tell. So you'll actually use the media of the paper as a mechanism for storytelling too.
Absolutely. Last question, Clive, comes from Serkan Kaya, and he asks, what are the biggest differences between photo and video for you?
Okay, again, you could spend a day on that one. Often on my commercial shoots, I'm doing both. So one of the biggest challenges is actually making the step change in thinking between working in stills and working in moving image. That's very, very, very difficult. When you're working in filmmaking, you're thinking as a director, you're thinking about the edit, you're thinking about the entire story, how's it going to cut, the performances, and also on the bigger shoots. I mean, if I look at some of the big sort of advertising shoots I've done and commercials, there can be as many as 50 people on a set, and they're all looking to you as the director. One of the hardest things I found, actually, incidentally, becoming a director, was handing the camera over. That was one of the most difficult things. So choosing a good cinematographer is really important. But
giving out control.
You do, and you're handing that over because you're bringing a particular look to stuff. But more recently, I've managed to be second camera on shoots. So there's a complexity to filmmaking, which I kind of love and hate all at the same time, because, and one of the things that was so liberating about making this short film at home was I did it all myself. Now, I'm not saying I will always do that, I won't, but what I love about stills and photography is the purity of it. I can disappear off into Scotland on my own with one camera and one lens even, and have this liberating experience of just being connected to wherever I am with just a small bag, or even just the camera over my shoulder. And you just there is no one else that is part of that. It's just me and the environment that I'm in. So there's a purity to that I absolutely love and adore. I like both for different reasons.
Well, I wanted to name one project in particular because I think you are, as a photographer and a filmmaker, you merge the two a lot of times in your projects, and I think one project in particular stands out and everybody should check it out. We put the link in the description and maybe we can show already something. There's a beautiful page about it on the Canon website, and it's your project with Sir Don McCullin in Calcutta. That was made like a kind of behind the scenes movie film, and he made the pictures, which he can do beautifully, as you would say, I think. And I think that's a beautiful project for people to see, like the combination with photography and filmmaking and what it all means.
You made a really good point, because that film, it was a great honour, first of all, to work with Don on that. I've worked with Don for over a decade now. I mean, Don is arguably, you know, quite simply one of our greatest living photographers, and many photographers who I know became photographers because of his work. So I'm very lucky that we share the same agent, and I've worked with Don for over a decade. But we had this opportunity to film him in his favourite city, Calcutta, and that city gave us the opportunity for him to be let loose. And wherever you look, there's a picture. This is on the streets of Calcutta, the street people, which meant that as a filmmaker, we could just follow him. So Chris, my cinematographer, would work with Don. I would be on second camera. This was all shot on C300 II, and it gave Don this freedom. But what Don would do would talk to Chris, and he would actually say, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And that's what the film's about. It's this little journey of Don at work on the street. And so the two things happen there for me, and what's great for me to be able to share it, and hopefully for you, you can look at the filmmaking, but also within the film, you're looking at the advice from, you know, one of the greatest photographers of all time.
Yeah, it's a beautiful project and a beautiful page about it too. So I address people to look at it. So now is the big moment, because we're going to What's in the Bag. And you, as a photographer and a filmmaker, you probably have two separate bags. So we're going to do that in 2 minutes. Let's prepare and let's do it, right?
Okay.
We gaan naar What's in the Bag.
Yeah, I mean, when you asked about what's in the bag, I thought, instead of actually, you know, lifting stuff up here, I thought we'll go to my sort of what I call my print table, where I prepare my kit, and we can do it from another angle. So I'll get up now and head over there.
What's in the Bag, je weet hoe het werkt. 1 minuut om te kijken wat er in Clive's tas zit. Dat gaan we nu dus 2 keer doen. En we beginnen met zijn fotografietas. Clive, your photography gear. Your 1 minute goes now.
Okay, so here's my bag. Believe it or not, we're looking at an EOS R 50mm prime. We talked earlier on about the lighting, which is it's Fomex lighting, and I always carry this really good battery there. I carry SSDs, plenty of spare batteries. I also, interestingly, carry one of those, which is a a G5X Mark II, and of course a pad and my pen. I take a very particular pen. It's my astronaut pen. which I love. And you know, to be honest with you, that's pretty much it. And some people.
Wow, Clive, you are done within the minute. Congratulations! And to be honest, I'm really impressed. If this is your photography kit, and you're making these pictures that you're making with this little.
There was one bit I missed out actually, which has fallen down the back of my.
Okay.
Pad, which is a deflector. It's quite an important bit of kit. Quite a big bit of kit, but
oh, a big bit. Yes.
That's it.
Wow, I'm really impressed that this is your photography kit with only like the EOS R and the 50mm, and then your G5X. For what kind of things do you use that, Clive? The G5X?
I'm so confident about the G5X that if, for example, I was to either break or lose the EOS R, I would actually work with this.
Oh, really?
You know, it's such a great camera. It's almost like having a mini EOS R because you have an OLED viewfinder. So if you can see that.
Yes.
And it's in such a small form factor. You know, it's an incredible piece of technology, that.
Fantastic.
So I really, you know, that's the kind of camera you can carry with you anywhere.
That's true.
Of course, I haven't got two EOS R bodies, but I could carry another body as well, potentially. The deflector is very important because these are, to my experience, are quite new. As you can see here, you've got reflective material, but also you've got a diffuser between that, so it both diffuses light and reflects light in one. Although it looks quite big on camera here, it's not that big.
That will come in handy a lot of times, and it's really easy to hold too, yeah?
That's really useful. And this is a bicolor LED, and you control this from here. You know, that's it really. You know, that's a lot of what I can shoot with that.
Wow. So you don't need a lot of stuff to do great photography, that's for sure. I'm really interested now in what's gonna be your filmmaking gear. So let's hop to that one. So Clive, we're going to your filmmaking kit. I'm really interested into that. So if you're ready, let's start.
Okay, let's start. Well, I'll start with what I carry the kit in. I use f-stop gear. And they have this very clever transport system which you can compartmentalize the kit. So for the bigger projects, you've got a C200 and obviously a condenser mic. In that case, it's a Rode. I'll bring this back in. So, but EOS R again, of course, you're going to want the adapter and then the various lenses that you might use with that. So 85, 180 can be used as well. And then of course you mustn't forget sound, which is very important. In that case it's the Zoom H6, and of course tripods, and in the case of the C200 you need some CFast cards as well. So a selection of lenses, but that's not you know, that's pretty much most of what I would use, and a good tripod.
Wow, great, Clive. Again, you hit the minute mark. Great. And what I wanted to add to that is that I really like to see the combination from the C200 and the EOS R, which I think in the EOS R you can have almost a little C200 next to the real one, right? Exactly.
I think what's interesting is the crop factor on this, as you probably find yourselves, matches Cinema EOS. So, and of course you can shoot in log on this as well if you need to. yeah, it's a great system. It's a great system. Works really well. Obviously, the adapter is really useful. And you know, in terms of lenses, you could take any number with you on that. But I like the C200. I think it's a great camera in that you can shoot cine raw light, but the actual camera is very, very portable. You know, it's not too heavy, so it delivers big for a relatively small form factor, which I really like. And incidentally, I like the 1635 zoom because with the crop factor, that's about 24 to 50-ish, something like that, which I think works extremely well. And when we made McCullen in Calcutta, we used those zooms. Again, EF and not cinema lenses. Reason for that being that on more running gun shoots like documentary, the lenses are super lightweight and are interchangeable, of course, with a DSLR like a 5D Mark IV or an EOS R.
Well, a great piece of gear. Thank you for this great experience also from the top-down view. We could really dive into your bag. Really great. Thank you very much. We're going to portfolio round 2. Portfolio ronde 2. Portfolio ronde 2 en deze foto, een hele mooie, komt van Rob Bos. Rob Bos made this beautiful picture, Clive. It's a little bit even a little wink to your own style, I thought, when I saw it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really like this picture. I know we talked about this earlier, but I'm a big fan of prime lenses. I mean, I don't use them all the time. I love particularly the new RF zooms are amazing because they act like primes. But you know, I like the way the subject's lit. I mean, if you want to look at rule of thirds, you know, it follows the rules here. You know, putting the subject in the middle there. I like the fact that you've isolated the profile from the background. And I guess that because of that, because of the light, because of the selective focus, and also the kind of dreamy look on her face, lends itself quite nicely to becoming an atmospheric picture, an atmospheric portrait. So yes, I rather like that actually.
And if you would have to give a little tip to make it maybe even better, or is this a great picture in itself?
I think one thing I would say about any kind of shoot, any kind of photography, I often feel, and I know I'm not alone in this, if I come away with just one picture I could put in a portfolio from every shoot, I would be over the moon. So
really?
yeah. So what I'm trying to say here, how hard it is to get that one picture, that picture that really gets that. Now, I'm not saying it's not happened here. I'm using this as a vehicle to make that point. How could this be improved? I mean, does the model engage with the camera? I don't know. Is there more narrative in the background? I don't know. So, you know, there are many ways in which you can add to that picture to potentially create more impact, maybe. But equally, it works in its own right too. Yes. So, I mean, I know that. I mean, also we haven't touched upon this, but for me personally, I mean, look, talk technical very briefly, but I always shoot raw, always. I never shoot, and actually even in filmmaking, many of the bigger shoots I've shot on raw as well. So giving you that extra bit depth, particularly, you know, when you look at making prints.
Yes,
you know, that's really, really important. Yes. And also a little tip, if you're exporting your files and you want to create the best future-proofing of your work, then use ProPhoto RGB because you're going to achieve much more of the color gamut. And again, in my filmmaking, I mean, if you look at McCullen in Calcutta, that was shot in 4K, and we actually shot that in HDR as well. So I'm always looking to future-proof my work. So I have just a complete raw workflow. You know, I almost never shoot in JPEG. However, the JPEGs now, I have to say, are particularly good.
Well, I think that last one is also a great tip that we heard other photographers say in this show also. So I think hearing you say that even more makes that point. Shoot in RAW, shoot for the future. Absolutely.
And also, just one last tip on that one. I mean, RAW does give you will get more shadow recovery. I always tend to shoot for the highlight. Other people might do differently, but for me personally, I tend to shoot for the highlight because I find shadow recovery easier than highlight recovery.
Thank you very much. Great advice. We're going to the last questions and answers round. Vragenronde nummer 3. Vragenronde 3. We gaan gelijk beginnen met de eerste vraag van Tony de Leeuw. She asks you, how do you prepare your shoots?
Okay, it's a really important question, this. Preparation is the key to achieving your goals, having a successful shoot. If it's a studio shoot, there is sometimes weeks of preparation involved in that. That might be stills or film. I'm very fortunate. I have an agent and a producer. So the producer will do a lot of the preparation for me. I'm very fortunate also to have assistants on those bigger shoots, hair, makeup, stylists, but I still have to work very closely with all these people. One of the things that I do actually is I create film treatments and stills treatments. These are, and I can give you some examples of these, and they help everyone see, right from the client right through to the team and the crew, exactly what's in my head. And sometimes I'll also create pinboards in Pinterest, and we'll all throw in examples of how you like this and that composition, and that's a really useful tool because I can then work closely with a stylist. I can work up with makeup. I mean, it's really a good way to create mood boards. That's what it is. And
create a vision for what's going to be, right?
Yeah. I mean, we did that with Birmingham Royal Ballet with all the silks and satins, and that worked extremely well. And also it helped the client understand what it was that I was trying to do too. So there are many ways you can do that. I mean, I learned early on working on the set with Nick Knight that the sheer amount of preparation that would go into these very big high fashion shoots was it was almost like a military operation, in that when Nick would walk on set, everything had been thought through. And of course you have a script, but there are going to be times when you go off script as well. But it's really important to have a script and be as prepared as you possibly can be. And that means collaboration, and it means having a good team around you as well.
Yes, and it helps efficiency. And let's not forget about your earlier comment about making a connection with your subject. So that's a huge part of your preparation too, I think.
Yeah, it's a good point you make. Part of that preparation is getting to know the subject. You don't always have time, particularly if you're working with celebrities. But if you can, that's where your interpersonal skills become really important. And if you're shy as a person, you have to really work on that. I'm outside of, say, a conversation like this, I'm probably quite quiet. But in this situation, I'm talking about what I love to do, and so I kind of get quite animated. But yeah, it's very much about practice as well, because those two, practice and preparation, those two things come together. And of course you learn from every shoot, and you take those learnings onto the next shoot.
Absolutely. And to talk about preparation, I heard that you were doing a big preparation to speak out my name properly, right? That was a big challenge.
Michael.
Well, that's gonna be nice for the Dutch viewers, this one. I assure you of that. Okay, we're going to the next question, which is all about the EOS R and the 5D, which are two cameras getting close to each other. I saw that you have worked with both of the cameras. Wiliam Rutten asked that. Do you use both cameras, and when do you use which one?
Yeah, I do use both cameras. In fact, right now I've got a 5D Mark IV on a 50mm prime recording me as we're talking, and on my print table there'll be another 5D Mark IV. 5D Mark IV is good for both stills, of course, and for filmmakers, you know, with log and 4K. What's good, I mean, the really great thing right now about, say, 5D and EF lenses is if I'm working at sea, for example, where I might get hit by a wave from a lifeboat, the 5D, 4 and the EF primes particularly, and zooms are very, very, very robust. I've never had a camera fail on me, ever. And I've literally, there was one time, it was a couple of years ago, and again, you can see this on my website, where it was winter. I was on a catamaran fishing boat. It was 50-mile-per-hour winds. It was snowing, and it was -5. And we got drenched by the bow wave of the lifeboat as I was photographing it. And the bow wave, this is a 42-ton boat, the bow wave hit me full in the face. I mean, I have a safety officer with me. This is all very safe and choreographed and thought through, but the bow wave hit me full in the face, and of course hit the 5D Mark IV full in the face too. Wow. So I thought, oh, that's really gonna ruin it. Anyway, we got back to the lifeboat station, and I thought, well, it's already been drenched, so I ran it under a tap. You know, I just put the tap on, and to get the salt water, I just literally ran it under it. And that's the same camera that is now recording me right now. Wow. So that's a good reason for using 5D and in EF lenses, primes and zooms. But I have to say that I am a total and complete convert to EOS R and EOS R system. The EOS R and the RF primes and zooms are quite literally the best camera and lens combinations I have ever seen from any camera ever in my career. They are sharp from corner to corner. The focusing system is extremely good. There's no chromatic aberration. The files that you get out of them look like medium format. They print beautifully well. I mean, if you like shooting JPEGs, the JPEGs are beautiful. The RAWs are beautiful. So I've become quite liberated now with my EOS R, particularly with the RF 50mm, which I absolutely love to shoot with. So I think there is room for both cameras and both systems, but if I'm not in an environment that is particularly challenging, you know, weather-wise, then I would almost certainly be using my EOS R and my 50 prime.
Well, that really clear answer, and both stating great cameras. But really clear answer about why using the DSLR.
There is one extra point actually, and that's one of the big pluses with EOS R system is the electronic viewfinder, because I can see mixed light, I can see what I'm going to shoot. In fact, I've cut the amount that I shoot has been cut by maybe a third to a half, literally from shooting on EOS R.
Wow. And I heard you talk about the 50mm f1.8, I guess. Is that your favorite lens also?
It's 1.2 actually. The
1.2?
Yeah, in fact, this what we're looking at now, what I'm filming on now is the EF 1.2. And the other lens that I use on the EOS R is the RF 50 1.2.
Wow. And because Luca van der Meer asked, which lenses are your favorite? Do you use the most?
Definitely. I mean, I built a career on the 85 prime actually, so that's been a lens that I've loved, and I love that that focal length, both for portraiture and also for landscape. I think it's a great lens, that. And I've actually worked my way through the original 85 right up to the, you know, the more modern 85. And of course now with RF we have two 85s. So you can experiment with those. But I have to say the RF50 is so good. And I love the 50mm focal length. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that if you look at, for example, Cartier-Bresson's work, arguably again one of the greatest photographers in history, I think the majority of his work, or a large majority of his work, was shot on a 50mm lens because it's the nearest focal length to the human eye. So there is a, you know, it is a great single prime. And if anybody says to me, you know, what lens should I get? And people often think, oh, he's going to say a zoom. I don't. I say get a 50mm. Now the 50mm, I should say, that is on a full frame sensor. So let's be clear about that. If you've got a
APS-C,
yeah, well then you maybe get a 35, you know.
Yes, okay.
If you like street photography, you might want to consider a 35 prime.
Yeah.
As opposed to a 50. It's a subjective thing, but yeah, I'm a big fan of primes. But of course now with Canon we have these amazing RF lenses which are behaving like prime lenses, and in one zoom you've got kind of 3 lenses. So they're very exciting times to be with the brand. I mean, I'm with a brand that supplies me with every kind of still camera and lens I could possibly want, every kind of moving image camera I could possibly want, and every kind of printer I could want. There isn't another brand in the world that can do that.
Well, enough to choose for Luca in this case. Enough great objectives you mentioned. We're going to the last portfolio round with the last picture. Portfolio ronde 3. Portfolio ronde 3, de laatste foto in dit geval, komt van Erwin Rossin. A beautiful picture of Erwin. Also a little bit fashion shoot kind of, I think.
Yeah, I really like this, and I'm going to explain something that I think is really important, which I've not mentioned in the previous 2 pictures, and that is that as photographers and filmmakers, it's really important we define a style. You know, we create a look, we create a tone of voice, kind of like putting our own DNA inside of our work. And this is really important. In filmmaking, it's actually much easier to do because there are so many variables. You know, from the edit, from the way you light, from the way you cut, of the way you shoot. So it's much harder to say copy, but it's also easier to create a look and a feel. In photography, that comes down to, you know, the way we see the world, and then the way we light the world, the connection we make with the subject, and also then technically how we use depth of field and composition. And what's interesting about this is that to me at least, there seems to be a style. The style comes from the way the model is looking out to the left of the camera. The actual the sort of coolness, the color temperature, shall we say, of the picture, which I kind of like too. Compositionally, it works to, you know, the rule of thirds again. I also like the foreground background. You know, I think that's kind of interesting. I like the use of colour in this picture a lot. And to me, I would like to see more work from that photographer, and to see if that style is something that photographer, that Erwin has actually is developed, and whether you can actually pick out Erwin's work from other photographers, because really that's our goal as photographers and filmmakers. You know, you need to be able to create a style where someone thinks, oh, that's an Erwin picture, or that's a Clive picture, or that's a Rob picture. You know, so this is really important because distinguishing ourselves from our peers and from other people is part of the reason why we get commissioned.
Yeah, and well, for starters, I think Erwin is pleased to hear this, probably. Maybe he could send you some of his work to review more. And this foreground background thing that you mentioned, I think that's a cool tip also, because you are doing this right now in the shot that you're making also with the headphones and the C200, I think, in the background.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm about 1.8 on here. I'm just looking at my live view here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's this atmosphere, and what of course what I'm doing here is, if I had depth of field from front to back, for me at least, I feel that this would be confusing, and that would be confusing. Where as a creative, I'm able to draw your attention, the viewer, to me through depth of field, and that incidentally is where the prime lens becomes really important. You know, if you want to really isolate somebody, then you're looking at, you know, anything from 2.8 and above. And at Canon we have primes that can go up to 2, but also we have zooms that can go up to 2, but also our primes can go right up to 1.2.
Yeah. Well, it absolutely creates a 3D atmosphere in this case. So great tip also. Thank you very much for all your good advice. We're going to the last part. We're almost there. It's the pro tip of Clive Booth. The pro tip. De pro tip van Clive Booth. Clive, your pro tip. And I guess you already a little bit talked about this.
Yeah, I think I've already, I guess I've explained it, is that if there is one thing above all other, it's actually finding your tone of voice. It's you know, if you're a writer, it's how you write a story. How do you tell that story? If you're a painter, you know, you create a style of painting, and it's just the same in photography and filmmaking. You're looking to create a look and a feel that is distinctive to you and you alone. Slightly easier to do in filmmaking, maybe, because there are so many more avenues or complexities in filmmaking, maybe harder to do in photography. I mean, for me, it's been very much about using prime lenses, using selective focus, using light, connection with the subject. So yeah, it's, I mean, to understand that better, look at other people's work, people that you respect, and you will start to see that you know, that is such and such a photographer's work, and without even knowing the name, and if there's not a name associated with that, you will see that that style is that particular photographer. I mean, a good example is a photographer I've worked a lot with is Miles Aldrich. Look at Miles Aldrich's work, one of Britain's greatest fashion photographers, a very distinctive style. So, and again, Nick Knight, Don McCullum, there are many others who I've worked with. A very great photographer friend of mine, Doug Menuez in America, who first inspired me to pick up a camera professionally. And Doug was a great advocate of using selective focus in reportage, and I loved that. So yeah, defining a style, a tone of voice, something that is going to distinguish you from others is going to get you commissioned.
Totally agree with that. Beautiful advice. On this very moment, Clive, are you working on a project that you would mention?
I am, and it's a particularly unusual project because in this instance I'm not taking any pictures, so that's got to be a first. So I've been invited to work with astronaut, explorer, games designer, entrepreneur Richard Garriott. He was one of the first commercial astronauts in the world to fly to the International Space Station in 2008. His background is in games design, so he's known as the sort of the father of online gaming. In fact, it was Richard's games that coined or created the phrase avatar. So, I mean, look him up. He's an amazing, eclectic career, but a great adventurer and explorer. And Richard is hoping to dive the Mariana Trench within the next couple of weeks, and so myself and a colleague at Canon have been working closely with Richard to take an EOS R and an RF zoom. I think it's a 15 or 16 to 35 he's taking with him, and I've set him the challenge to shoot a self-portrait at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and I want that picture, I'd like to think that that picture could be a really emotive self-portrait. So for him not to, although he's got to light himself, and I did talk a little bit about the lighting, I hope that he's able to make that connection with the camera, and rather than be a selfie, be a self-portrait. Of course, within the submersible itself, it's a very enclosed space, so he has a small LED light. And then we talked about three-dimensional lighting, so looking very much for as much atmosphere in that picture as possible. So I'd be very interested to see what Richard does with that.
A lot of first at that trip, right? Going so deep, making your portrait, having the EOSR on that deep of level, deep in the ocean. That's a special project to advise him on.
It is. He's also taken some prints that we've made from the Canon Young People program. Some of the work that they've done about the effects of single-use plastics and microplastics in the ocean, which is something Richard's very passionate about as well, and he's doing some experiments into that. So that's also very exciting for the young people that I work with, that Richard will be taking that work to the bottom of the Mariana Trench at nearly just under 11,000 meters below the sea. 8 tons of pressure per square inch, just to put it in perspective.
Don't go outside the... how do you call that kind of
it's the hull
ship?
of a submarine. I mean, it's
submarine,
really,
it's
a submersible.
Don't go out.
Yeah, no.
Well, we're looking forward to the results of that project. It's going to be a special one. Clive, I want to thank you very, very, very much for this lovely conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and I hope our viewers got a lot out of this and a lot of good advices.
It's been a pleasure. You know, I love talking about photography and filmmaking, printmaking and design, and you know, I really enjoyed the preparation that you guys put into this. You know, all the information that you give to me, you know, prior to the preparation we do the day before. I mean, it all adds to, you know, creating really thought-provoking and great content. And you know, a lot of what is said in here is what you guys are doing with the work you're doing. So, you know, you also should be taking some thanks for this, because I'm sitting here because of you guys and because of the preparation that you put into this. So so thanks for giving me the opportunity and for being part of this.
With pleasure. Thank you very much for the beautiful words, and would love to work together in the future.
I hope so.
Let's make that happen. Thank you very much, Clive. I'm going to end this show with my Dutch viewers switching to Dutch now. Bye bye.
Bye bye now.
En jullie natuurlijk ontzettend bedankt voor het kijken naar deze Meet the Pro. Houd zeker ook onze Facebookpagina in de gaten om te kijken welke gasten er nog bij ons langskomen en voor wie je dus nog vragen en foto's in kunt zenden. Vergeet ook zeker niet volgende week woensdagavond om 8 uur weer klaar te zitten voor de première van onze volgende aflevering met Pim Ras. Goed, bedankt voor het kijken. Tot de volgende.